Hi,
Hi.
you.
Good. How are you?
I'm good too. So I'll just start by introducing what we're going to be talking about today.
hmm
Welcome, um, welcome to Reset Revolution. Today I'm joined by Sabrina, and we are going to be discussing um, voting rates in AAPI, so Asian American Pacific Island countries. And so, could you just start by introducing yourself, maybe a bit about your background and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Sabrina. I am um from Texas. I live in the US and I um am a professional fundraiser. So I used to work on campaigns as, finance positions or finance directors. And now I actually work in advocacy as a fundraiser still for a nonprofit.
Okay, very interesting. So, just to jump in, what was it that first drew you to AAPI advocacy, and what problems do you think that in the communities to do with voting rates that you thought needed to be solved?
Yeah, one of the biggest reasons that I wanted to jump into AAPI advocacy was largely because of the pandemic. Um, as we saw, once COVID happened, there was, I think it was like 110% increase in anti-Asian hate crimes. And so during that time, when you're uh, like when you were in lockdown and like you didn't really have much to do and all you did was really just see the news and think about things, I
Hmm.
um, really felt like I wanted to do more, because I have had experience and, my background was in politics and I, know
Yeah,
what political organizing looks like.
yeah.
Um, and so that really led me to want to organize Austin. So I live in Austin right now.
Hmm.
Austin's Stop Asian Hate Rally, which was an amazing and incredible start. We had over 1,000 people attend the rally, and that rally kind of brought together a lot of people and made it clear that, like, our work here and as far as Asian Americans go and Asians in general in Texas have a long way to go.
Yeah.
Um, we just, some statistics is we're the fastest growing population in the US.
Hmm.
And the number of like voters that we have is also the fastest growing as well. Um, so the fastest growing voters, number of voters, and then the fastest growing um, voting rate.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of progress because, before the AAPI community was kind of like either apolitical or like, I would say just like kind of apolitical or, didn't really care. But then since 2020, we've had the biggest jump.
Yeah. Yeah. And what problems do you think that exist in AAPI communities to do with the voting rates and getting people to be more active politically?
Definitely one thing is that this is kind of one of the biggest overarching problems I would say in America with the AAPI community, or not the community, but the organizing of the
Yeah.
AAPI community is that it's such a broad community,
Yeah.
like it's encompassing of so many different cultures, so many different ethnic groups. It's hard to throw it all into one category. So when you hear the term API, like you could talk about someone that looks like me. You could also talk about someone else that, does looks like nothing like me, doesn't speak the language that I speak. And so one of the biggest things is that, each culture of the API community is vastly different. We speak in our group over 100 languages. It's just one of the things that's difficult is getting the disaggregated data for that because like again, each culture has different beliefs and value systems and things like that. So when you try to use the term AAPI as like one blanket statement, it really leaves out a lot of um, you know the nuances and the different cultures of that comprise that. And one of the biggest things that we kept running into is lack of translation materials. So they would have obviously like the big ones, like they would have Mandarin available, they would have like Vietnamese available, but then they would leave out a lot of the other languages that also make up API, and they would be like, "Well, we have that translation." It's like, well, that's only like
Yeah.
two cultures represented in like the vast diaspora of
Yeah.
API.
Mm-hmm. And translation, what other reasons do you think there are for this attitude of being apolitical and low voting rates?
I think it's like America in general has a pretty low voting rate. Like we struggle chronically with a low voter turnout because a lot of the people here have been disenfranchised. It's hard to vote here, especially in Texas. We are consistently ranked as the 49th or 48th state in voter turnout in 50. So it's just, something that is just present everywhere where it's or in kind of in the American culture where we don't prioritize things like voting and civic engagement. And I would say one of the biggest reasons of the AAPI community probably not wanting to vote is just um, feeling like it wasn't part of like their system.
Mm-hmm.
They feel a sense of like othering, or they feel like it's like, oh, I'm not like this. This isn't directly related to me. Like the people who run and organize and run for office have never directly reached out to our community and made it so that we want to vote or are excited to.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For example, here in Belgium, it's illegal not to vote, and that's really interesting because I feel like a lot of the reason why people in the U.S. don't vote is because even though they have an opinion, they don't feel as though their vote will really have much of an impact on the outcome. But then you see that in bulk, it really does have an impact.
Yeah, no, that's like what we love to say is, like your one vote matters, especially in, things like the primary, where, you know, you can get to a runoff with literally like 100 or so votes. And that one is a situation where every single vote matters.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, in local races too. And that's, one thing a lot of countries implement too is voting is by law required. You need to do it. Like it's just not negotiable. And
Mm-hmm.
in here, it is a thing that people really take for granted and see as like voluntary. And it's like, no, that's your civic duty. And this is how you get to voice your opinion on who you get to see as your leaders. And thankfully, you know, I think one of the biggest reasons why we have the AAPI community has also had such an increase in voter turnout is because, again, like, if you see people that look like you running for office, you're more likely you're going to want to support them. So over the last, years or so, especially since the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
we've had like a huge increase in the number of AAPI identifying candidates.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we've already talked about the rallies that you helped organize. Could you talk a bit more in detail about the different advocacy work you've done in relation to voting rates and also with the community?
Yeah, so after the rally, this incredible organization formed from the rally organizers. So Asian Texans for Justice formed, and this is the first statewide AAPI organizing kind of advocacy group.
Yeah.
Um, it says a lot that Texas didn't really have a specific state dedicated to statewide organizing
Mm-hmm.
group for AAPIs until 2022.
Yeah.
like, there have been very active local chapters. So, there's people who focus on the city that they live in and don't really venture out of that. And so, for ATJ, we have been trying to make a conscious effort to do organizing cross statewide. And one of the things that I had an amazing opportunity to participate in was I led their field program for the March primary. So I actually helped lead the paid canvas program where we recruited a bunch of AAPI canvassers to knock on, targeted AAPI doors in Austin.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and just like statistically, the primary has like super low turnout rates in general. So the state of Texas was like, or at least like Travis County was somewhere around 4%. I think that's like probably what Texas's end up being was 4%. But in the doors that we've knocked, that we went out to talk to, our voter turnout rate was around 8%. So it was like double that of the regular turnout. So that was a huge accomplishment for us, and something that proves again that if you have a plan to organize them, to reach out to them, and to let them know that their vote matters, that they should vote, people will vote. And so it's just one of those things where people just don't reach out, people just don't organize in that community specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's super important to really actively engage, like knocking on people's doors, something where these communities that are often very isolated from the voting process, you really just need people to communicate directly with them.
Mm-hmm.
So, May is AAPI Heritage Month. In your opinion, what are the kinds of conversations that we need to be having, and what action do you think that lawmakers need to make this month?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I would personally love to see is just an acknowledgement for how vast the diaspora is, again, of the AAPI community. Like, I hope that people in the month of May aren't just like, I love Chinese food, and they're like, that's my way of celebrating May Heritage Month for y'all. Because again, like, that's not what our community is. There's so many more cultures that should be recognized as well in addition to that. And I hope that people see that and people can understand just exactly how big and how diverse like our group is. And on top of that, recognize that Asian hate crimes haven't gone down.
Yeah.
The rates pretty much have stayed more or less the same since the pandemic. It's just that the media has actually stopped reporting on a lot of it, which is sad because it's also one of those things that needs to be shed light on. And I would also just like to preface that, the media also has done a great disservice to us in the way that when they report what crimes happen, it's not very representative of the whole of the crimes. So in our like news media, we often see a lot of crimes perpetrated by members of the Black community against the Asian community, and statistically, the rates of white people perpetrating the hate crimes are higher, and or if not the same,
Mm-hmm.
and those are the cases that are being picked up and reported. And so one of the things that is the most important that I think we really were mindful about when we planned the rally was that, in order for us to become more powerful and more strong in our voice, is to actually join in with the voices of other, marginalized and other disenfranchised groups, because that's what makes us stronger. We're
Yeah.
not trying to, isolate ourselves and say like, we're the ones that like need the focus. Like, no, like, all of us need the
Yeah.
focus, because like when we are divided, it makes the people who want to oppress us stronger. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I would really want to stress, to be mindful of, during this month, is to not to is to be wary and be mindful of these things.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing to raise. And I think, especially in relation to voting rates, a problem that is is really prominent in a lot of communities of color, because there's just not enough access to correct information, or like purposefully purposeful blocking of access to voting, like polls. So I think that, yeah, seeing this more as a collective fight is really important. And you've sort of already covered this, but what are your hopes for the future of AAPI voting rates and the community in general?
One thing that I would love to see, one again, is disaggregated data. Like, I cannot stress how important that is. I feel like our survey response, whenever we do any polling, whenever we do, anything that's like related to like demographic or surveys, like our responses are like all over the place, because again, like, Asians aren't a monolith. Like, we aren't one group. We're comprised of, like, over 100 different languages. So I would love to be in a place where we could eventually get there one day, where they, could break down the different categories and not put us all in one.
Yeah.
um, just to make things easier for things like language availability, things like, voter translations.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely want to get to a place where seeing, like, in the, I don't think this will happen in, the next couple of years, but maybe in the next generation when I'm older or something, that we normalize seeing candidates that are AAPI. Because I feel like right now, when I see candidates run, they're always like, if I'm elected, I'll be the first Asian person in, X position at X place. And I want to eventually get to a point where whenever an Asian person runs for office, they don't have to say that.
Yeah, there are a lot of firsts, yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
somewhere there haven't even been any Asian people, yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for participating and sharing so much of your knowledge. And I really hope that you continue doing all your amazing work. So, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for, your time and doing this, and, asking such thoughtful questions as well.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.